one of the topics that is really important to me and really helped me kind of make sense of reality itself and the structures of reality, and how there can be an eternal God, a spiritual realm, an angelic realm, how this world and life and consciousness could exist here on this planet, but be attached to, but separated from these other forms of reality that the Bible talks about, right? It's the concept of dimensions, okay? And dimensions means something very specific in like the scientific community. And I think we can take that understanding from the scientific community and extrapolate that out into our understanding of the creation, the layered structure of creation that God made. So just to kind of get our toes wet, what is dimensionality from kind of a scientific perspective? Let's start there.
Yeah, sure. And I'll say too, we absolutely can extrapolate a lot from scientific discoveries, but there's a big difference between observation and interpretation. So science, by and large, not every scientist, but just science, by and large today, is rooted in the idea that there's no God. And this is how things like the multiverse and stuff, it's fascinating of a concept as it is, and we could even talk about that later if you want, but this is how a lot of these ideas came up. It's like, well, we can't have a God. So how did everything come to be? There must be some other explanation. And of course, they give like, Big Bang models and then multiverse Big Bang models. And they're not super convincing because it no matter how far down the road you kick the can, it always comes back to the point, well, you somehow have to explain how something came from nothing, which is impossible according to your very own laws of physics, like your very own laws that you abide by. And they can't really get past that. So, but whether the scientists know it or not, when they do science, and when they do it correctly, they are observing God's creation. They're figuring out how God's creation works, how it operates. There's order in it, so things can be repeatable and testable, and you can repeat experiments and learn things about just the fundamental order of the universe. And so scientists aren't looking at that and seeing God. Some are, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them, they just see that as the natural order of the universe, and they don't really go far beyond that. So I will say that while the observations can absolutely be true, we can learn a lot from the observations that are made. The interpretations that scientists will put onto these things, we got to be really critical of that. Really critical. So dimensions, I totally, at least 3 of space and 1 of time, I believe in. I actually believe there are higher dimensions too. But basically what the idea of a dimension is it's basically what you have access to within a certain amount of space. So in our 3-dimensional space, that's what we call our reality. We have access to basically 3 directions, and they're all perpendicular, which means they're all at right angles. So we have forward, back. That counts as 1 dimension because back is forward if you turn around. So we got forward, back. You got side to side, and you got up and down. And those are all perpendicular lines. And you can orient that wherever you want in space. You could be facing this way or that way, and you still have access to all of those. But we only have those 3. And in geometry and some other mathematics, it's just the X, Y, and Z axes. So that's our world. And then we have 1 of time. And the reason that we only have 1 is because we go forward in time. And there was a past. So in a sense, we can't travel back in time. But in a sense, we were there before. So but there's no such thing as like sideways time. There's no at least not that we know of. I can't even imagine what something like that would be like. But and I've written a blog about that. But as far as we know, and even biblically, I don't think that there's any other dimensions of time. There might be, and God just hasn't revealed it. But there's certain things in the Bible where I think it's just this 1 dimension, and we all share it. Obviously, God is outside of that. God himself is not bound by time the way we are, but he can interact with it.
Right.
So where it gets really interesting is trying to think about dimensions higher than our own. So we know that we have three perpendicular, meaning at right angles. We have three directions that we can go. Now imagine a fourth dimension would have to follow those same rules. It would be another perpendicular direction, so it would have to be at a right angle to all those other ones somehow. And it would have to be a new direction. We can't imagine that. So one of the best explanations I've heard to try to explain what a fourth dimension of space, we're not talking about time right now, only space, what that would be like. I first heard from Chuck Missler, and it's a phenomenal presentation. He goes through this thought exercise called Flatland. I did have to watch it about 10 times to really get it.
Okay, so it's not just me.
No, this is everybody. It's totally fine. But the exciting thing is you can get it. Anybody can get this. It just takes some time because we're not taught this. I believe if we were taught this stuff from early on, it would be like second nature. We're never going to be able to visualize in our heads the fourth dimension ever, but we would at least kind of understand the concept of it better. So Chuck Missler, and he wasn't the first to do this. Like any physicist that talks about dimensions, they use this example called Flatland because it's just the best example we got. It's based on
I'm sure you're just going to say it. It's based on Edwin Abbott, I think was his name, right?
Yep.
The first person I heard talk about this was probably like 15, 20 years ago. It was Carl Sagan, and he's giving a presentation. You can look it up on YouTube. It's called Carl Sagan Fourth Dimension. Okay. And it's a fantastic presentation. And this was 20 years ago. I was probably like 15. And as I'm watching this thing, and I was Christian then too, as I'm watching this thing and he's talking about this and Sagan's like very anti-God. He's not giving glory to Christ through this explanation by any means, right? As he's talking about this concept and explaining, I'm like, that's how Jesus appeared in closed rooms. That's how people transported from here to there. Like it literally all made sense. That was the first time that I started asking weird questions like this because of Carl Sagan, who's like an atheist, giving an explanations of how dimensions actually work. And so now go into what it means, okay? Or how it's explained.
And isn't that amazing too, that because the church doesn't talk about this stuff by and large, some do, but because they don't, we have to go to atheistic sources to even begin to start a journey in understanding this.
And thank God I was already saved.
Yeah.
Because if I wasn't, I would have just followed in the interpretation of Carl Sagan.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So if we just owned these topics and gave satisfactory answers to people who are critical thinkers, maybe we wouldn't lose so many kids in high school or in high school, college. You know what I mean? Where people tend to fall off. Okay. Explain Flatland because this is exciting.
And I love it because this is the closest that we can get to understanding what a fourth dimensional reality would be like. And the first step is just understanding you're never going to be able to visualize it. You're never going to be able to, and that's okay. We're not meant to, But that doesn't mean that we can't know things about it. So the whole concept of Flatland is imagine there's a two-dimensional universe, flat. They don't have up or down. And, imagine that there are beings called Flatlanders that exist in this universe. And the universe doesn't have to be very big. It could just be the size of your tabletop or, maybe hovering like 2 or 3 feet off your tabletop or something.
Could be like a sheet of paper.
Yeah, exactly. And it's empty space and they exist in there. They can move around in there, but they don't have access to up or down. Something has been cut off from them, which I could talk about that too, because I actually just did a video on that. What the sword in the that turns every which way in the Garden of Eden was actually cutting. But we can get into that a little later.
Let me write that down.
Imagine that Flatland. It's cut off from the third dimension, which generally we would say is the z-axis, up and down. So they have forward, backward. They have left and right. No up or down. Well, imagine if Flatland's right here, and let's say I want to put a three-dimensional object in Flatland, but they don't have up or down, how would they see that? Like how would they, like, if they're looking at it, how would they see it? And there's a bunch of examples of this, but a common example is, well, if you drop a ball through Flatland, you could drop the ball, the Flatlander eventually will see every part of that ball, but it sees it in stages. So first, when the ball breaches Flatland, they'll just see a point in space, like just in front of them. If you drop it right in front of them, they'll just see a point, and then they'll see something start to expand. Now, imagine their perspective. They're looking straight ahead. They're only seeing kind of like a line, but they could probably, if they traveled around it, they could put together that it's a circle. Just like, if I have a ball in my hand, I can't see all sides of that ball, but I can turn it around and see that it's a ball. It's the same kind of thing. So they are seeing a circle, but they're seeing it just like as a line in front of them. So they see a point, and as the ball goes through Flatland, this point expands out bigger and bigger until the full circumference of the ball is like the ball is halfway through Flatland. Yeah. And then they'll see that line shrink and disappear as the ball falls out. They wouldn't know what they were looking at. They would have no clue to put that together, that's a three-dimensional image. It's the same if you do it with a cube. It would be the same thing, but it would be a square. Now, again, they're looking straight ahead, so they would see a line, or if the corner is in front of them, they might see, but they would be able to perceive that it's a square. Right. Now, if you wanted to show as much as you could of a cube to a Flatlander, how could you do that? Well, one thing, and this goes into a whole other thing that we can get into later if you guys want, but one thing is, and it's a big term, but I'll explain it. And by the way, just for the audience, don't get intimidated by these smart aleck scientists that want to use these big terms. Really, what they're doing is they're trying to, and I shouldn't generalize, not all of them are like this, but this language is created to make them look like they are so smart you can't possibly understand it. But really what it is they're kind of speaking a different language almost. Like that's all it is. And once you can kind of understand what they're talking about, it's not that like the words are just so complicated that you couldn't possibly understand. Anybody could understand this fine. It's just this. It should be the scientist's job to speak in a language that everybody can understand. So it's called extra dimensional unfolding. A really big word, but all it means is, like, you take a cube. Let's say Flatland is right here on my table. I take a cube, I put it down, and let's say it's hollow, so I can actually unfold this thing. Well, when you unfold a cube, you get 6 squares. 6 squares could be folded up to make a cube, and the 6 squares look like a cross. It's it's like that shape.
I'm drawing it right now because these are very visual topics. Yeah, you know what I mean. And there's such good representations out there if people want to look it up. But if you unfolded there you go. If you unfolded a cube, it would look like that. It literally would look like a cross, right?
Yep.
1,
so
2, 3, 4, 5, you got
6. Well, you would have 2 on the bottom there, but it's basically the same thing. There you go. You got it. That's it. So a Flatlander could see now the Flatlander could see every side of that cube. The Flatlander can't put together what that shape is supposed to look like in its natural 3-dimensional environment, but it has access to the most amount of information possible from that cube. It basically has all of it. It doesn't know up or down, so it can't put it together in its head. Right. So let's take that one dimension up. Let's say if there was a cube of 4 spatial dimensions instead of 3. And there's actually a name for it. It's called a hypercube. So if a 4th dimensional being, a being of one more spatial dimension than us, wanted to show us what a hypercube would look like, how could it do that? Well, it could do the exact same thing. It could unfold it, except instead of squares, we get cubes. And because we get 1 extra dimension, we get 2 extra arms to the cross. So basically, it's a stack of 4 cubes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then on the 3rd cube, on each of the 4 sides, there's 4 more cubes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's like a cross with 2 extra arms.
Dennis, Google this.
It's called a tesseract.
Okay. Dennis, Google it. You're going to screen share. We need to see these things.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense it makes more sense when you see it.
Absolutely. And that's the hardest part about sometimes doing interviews like this and trying to just convey it with language, because visuals really help.
Yeah.
And in my book, Quantum Creation, it was the first book that I'd done on this topic. So those are the hypercubes. And
but they're not stacked. Like I was looking for like this one kind of is.
That's a tesseract. Yeah, there you go.
Click that one.
Yeah, so see how it's 4 cubes from bottom to top, and then you got 1 cube on each side.
Yeah.
So it's as if the arms of the cross are going out left, right, forward, back.
Yes. So that's what a hypercube would look like if it was unfolded into our dimension and we could have access to the most amount of information about it. Now, just like the Flatlander cannot look at the two-dimensional cross and put together a cube because they don't have up or down, well, we don't have these extra 2 dimensions, or this extra 1 dimension, these extra 2 directions. We don't have those other 2. So we can't put together what that would really look like in its natural four-dimensional state. Right. So the best that we could have is that.
So that is one way that it helped me understand these concepts is as you what's it called? Descend, right? Into a lower dimension, you're limited to that dimension.
Yes.
Higher dimensional beings, entities, objects, shapes, higher dimensional objects cannot exist in a lower dimensional plane because that lower dimensional plane doesn't have all of the directions available to it.
Only a slice of them can.
Yeah. Only a slice.
So they technically can. Like I could, if Flatland were real, I could put my finger in Flatland and I could move it around and they would see basically a circle, but again, it's not. They're not looking at it top down. Sometimes that confuses people. When I say they see a circle, I don't mean that they're literally seeing like a circle like in front of them.
They're seeing the walls around the circle.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. They can perceive the circle in the way that we can perceive a sphere if we're looking at a ball. But I can exist in Flatland, but I can't exist as a Flatlander.
Right.
I can, and there's a really interesting correlation here. So I can put my finger in Flatland, move it around. I can put 2 fingers in Flatland and go like this, and they're going to think that's 2 different objects if they're looking at it as a cross section from right here. Now, this gets into some really interesting territory because how many lay people who have no background in quantum physics have reported seeing UFOs that do this exact thing, but in 3 dimensions? It's a point and it blows up. It splits off into 2. It splits off into 3. Yep. They move all around independently. Yep. They come back together and they disappear. Well, that makes perfect sense if there's higher dimensions.
Exactly.
And because that's what you would expect. And you don't even need technology to do that. If a Flatland universe existed, I don't need technology to put my finger in there or to walk through it or to somewhat interact with it. I just can't fully interact in the way that a Flatlander can. I would be the extra dimensional being in that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And you get all of these lay people, none of them have background in physics, and they're explaining this extra dimensional stuff that they should have no way of knowing about. And to me, that lends evidence that this is probably real. There must be higher dimensions. I think higher dimensions are what we would call, the spirit world or, heaven, hell. There's anything beyond the 3 dimension, just anything beyond physicality. The 3 dimensions of space and one of time as we know it.